So Sharon Larmour, very nice to be with you today. Nora Sanders, Dave Russell, and we're doing just some interviews about the history of Port Stanley and wanting to hear some of your memories. I forget how many years you said, but you're a lifelong resident of Port Stanley.
77 years. And I think if we look around, I'm not sure there's many been here now longer than that. It's, at one point I knew every person in the village and every house they lived in, and that's not so now. So I think when I look around, I'm not sure anybody that now has been here longer than I have. And it's just home, but it's not always been the best place to live. I started out on Maud Street. And Maud and Bessie were just little cottages. My entire growing years, I lived in a multi-generational household. It wasn't loud like nowadays with mother and dad and two kids and everybody had a big house. My grandparents lived with me, my mother's sister, my aunt lived with me, her son lived with me, and my two sisters and my mom and dad. In a small cottage on Maud Street is where we started. The interesting thing was the railway came down Carlow Road and made a big curve around through Maud and Bessie Street and came out by where Bookie's Pizza used to be. It's now an apartment. And our house was right beside the railroad tracks, and we weren't very big, but the train whistle went off as it crossed over the Bridge Street. And my parents said, when the train whistle went off, you make the front steps. Because we were playing right on the railroad tracks, right beside the railroad tracks. So you would hear the train whistle, and my mother who was home, would come to the porch, and there the three of us better be sitting on those front steps because that train went whipping by. And it was our playground. It's what we did.
So Sharon, you're talking about the LNPS.
Yeah,
and it was going all the way to the beach.
All the way down to the station on the beach and to the Stork Club. And an interesting fact is my mom and dad got engaged on the London Port Stanley Railway. My dad came back from the army, and my mom would take the train in from Port to London, and she worked in a dry cleaning shop. And the gentleman that ran the dry cleaning shop, he thought that she would be a wonderful catch for his son that had just gotten back from the army. So he set up the meeting, and my dad came back with my mom to Port, and they got engaged on the LNPS.
Wow.
So that takes me back there. And you would see all the people from London coming down for all the picnics. McCormick's, all of the big companies, Kellogg's, whatever. And as an older child, you learned you could go up to the top of Picnic Hill. Picnic Hill now is where Mariners Bluffs condos are. And there was a great big stage in the middle of the Picnic Hill. And all of the companies would come and bring all of their families. And as a kid from Port, you realized they didn't know who those kids were. You could go up there and get hot dogs. You could get a pop. You could get popsicles. You could get popcorn. They didn't know if you belonged to somebody. So my brother Greg, my sister Carol, I, and the Bell twins, we would be up there all the time. And they just gave it to you. They didn't know who you were, So I started out on Maud and Bessie Street, and then we moved over to William Street. And William Street used to have Keeler's grocery store, and it was right beside the train track. The train track went right past Keeler's grocery store, in between the Clifton Hotel, the Elgin Hotel, and the Keeler's grocery store. And we lived one house north of Keeler's grocery store, and it was owned by a gentleman from Detroit who owned a lot of homes in Port Stanley. He was a Jewish gentleman, Isidore LaBelle, and my parents rented from Isidore LaBelle, and my mom worked at Keeler's grocery store, and we would cross the tracks and go into the Clifton Hotel because my parents knew them, and they had Santa come in every year. And when it wasn't open for the public, we as kids could go into all the rooms and look at all the stuff going on and my dad and grandpa had a table at the Clifton Hotel. That was where they went after supper every night to have a beer with the locals. So I lived on William Street. There were fishermen that lived behind us, an old gentleman named Sammy the fisherman. He would come in with fresh fish every day and drop it off for my grandma to cook for us at night. Again, all of us moved, my grandparents, everybody stayed together. I started school when I was on William Street. You walked from wherever you were in Port Stanley to the schoolhouse that is now where the post office is. Big red schoolhouse with big stairs in the middle. We would gather there for assemblies. the grade 8s got the best spot. So as a grade 1 person, you were waiting to get to the best spot because you didn't have the best spot in the assembly.
And in those days, there was probably no kindergarten. You started with grade 1.
Grade 1. And my grade 1 teacher was Miss Graham. And Miss Graham had a 1/2 of an arm. She only had, had one arm that had been, for whatever reason, taken off at the elbow. First time I'd ever seen that as a child, but she was excellent, but there was no nonsense. There was more than once I was turned around because I was talking.
I can't imagine that, Sharon.
And again, all the kids in the village, you knew everybody. The village wasn't that big. So William Street is where I started school, walked to school with all the kids that were coming and going. And then when I was in grade 4, we moved to a very posh part of Port Stanley called Snob Hill. And it was the hill right up behind the schoolhouse. And we lived at the house on the top of the hill. And my dad and mom bought that house from Ezra Fauner, who owned Fauner Lumber, which is where the Legion is right now. And Ezra lived across the street, and Ernie, his son, lived up the street. Dora and Lionel Bolt, who owned Lionel's TV, lived up there. Helen Dimmick and her husband had Dimmick's Dry Goods. They lived up on the hill. Dr. Bell and his family lived up on the hill. So if you lived on the hill, you lived in the better part of town. And as Sue Damon always used to say to me, yes, Sharon, I stayed in the North Ward and you moved up the hill. So that's, I lived up the hill until, even after Larry and I got married, we had a small apartment. Then we moved back with my parents to stay with my grandmother while my parents traveled. And so this is the first house I've ever bought in Port Stanley, and we have been here 44 years.
You must have brought it, did you buy it brand new then?
It was 6 years old. And there was a couple that were leaving to buy a big place in Shedden. My mother worked in every grocery store in the village of Port Stanley, but she was working in Booker's IGA, and she knew the couple that had this house, and she said, oh, my daughter and son-in-law are looking for a house. We came out, we talked to them, we made a deal. They bought their house in Shedden, we bought the house here. There was no mortgage companies and all that kind of stuff. You just
made a deal and put it down.
Yeah.
And you're right across from the arena and the school, but when you bought the house, what was across the road? Were they there then?
Yes.
They were already there.
They were already there.
They were built.
Yep. The houses along here were all built by Ron and Case Van Zenten. Case Van Zenten used to be an insurance agent in Port Stanley with Irene Brown. And so we were the last house they built, and they kind of walked away from it. They weren't fond of this house. If you look, we were the only odd house on this street. There's matching houses for all the other houses but ours. They left the roof off. It filled with snow. They did all kinds of stuff. But by the time we bought it, it was, so yes. And living across from the school in the arena, we see all the kids now coming and going. And for my kids, they walked across the street to the school. They walked across the street to the arena. And, so this was, and this is where I've been now for 44 years. But when we went to school with all the kids, you knew every kid in the village. There wasn't a child in this village you didn't know. You knew every kid. You knew their family. Your parents didn't. There were no cell phones. Nobody knew where you were. We left home at 7 o'clock in the morning. The only rule was to be back when the streetlights come on. That was it. We would go down to Second Little Creek and First Little Creek and build cabins, and we dug wells, and the Rovers built things. We were everywhere in this village. At one point, we would go as far as you could along Big Beach. Didn't even think about the danger, and climb the cliffs and end up at the top of George Street. We'd climb right up the cliff. If somebody was falling, somebody would grab them. I remember Doug Bell and a bunch of us were going one time when we got into that kind of mud that's like quicksand, and we just couldn't get out. So Doug Bell laid on his belly and grabbed a hold of me and pulled me, left my boots in the mud, walked home in my sock feet, but we didn't think about it. You just did it. There was no sitting on your phone or any of that. We were out and about all of the time. So I went to school in Port Stanley, went to high school in St. Thomas at Arthur Voden, and it was awakening because people that came from Port Stanley weren't very good in those days. The beach was dirty, the fish were full of mercury. You just didn't have friends that wanted to be your friend if you came from Port Stanley. That was the first to me to ever think, somebody doesn't like my village. It wasn't great. It wasn't like it is now, but to be kind of have that brought up to you, it was really an eye-opener for me. The other thing is, in those days, not every person had a car, so from Port Stanley, you couldn't take part in extracurricular after school because there's no way to get home. If you didn't get the bus, you didn't get home. So from there, my first job was for Ross Hardcastle at the CIBC, which is where Revive is now, at the corner, and I was a bank teller for Ross Hardcastle. And I got married while I was working at the bank, and my husband started his barber shop in Port Stanley. He was a barber. He's not any longer. But after we got married and I was pregnant for my first child, Mr. Hardcastle looked at me in those days and said, when will you be done? There was no paternity leave. There was nothing. You were out of a job. Do the best you could, because nobody was going to hold your job or give it to you after that. So from there, after that, I worked for a while for Scotty Darlington and Fred Darlington down here where the condos are down on Carlow Road. They used to have the Kettle Creek Boat Works, and they built boats. And so I worked in their office as their secretary for a while until Penny Tolmie approached me, and I started working for the village. So I started in the village as the treasurer in the village, and then became treasurer CAO after David LaCroix had his stroke and couldn't be the CAO. From there, Larry Shaw, who used to own Shaw's Ice Cream, approached me to move and become the treasurer for the township of Yarmouth, which touched Port Stanley, touched Belmont. So I moved from here and became treasurer, director of finance for Yarmouth Township. Then along came Mike Harris and amalgamation. Port Stanley, Belmont, and Yarmouth Township became the Central Elgin, and I was director of finance for Central Elgin, 31 years in municipal government. When I was the treasurer tax collector in Port Stanley, I knew everybody's house. I knew everybody's name. I didn't need a map to get around. There was no place in this village I didn't know, and I hadn't been. It was just part of who you are. Going up on the Picnic Hill, when it was the Picnic Hill, on the backside, kind of where Susan McConnell lives now back there, there was the biggest field of lily of the valley you have ever seen in your life. And every spring I would go up there and fill baskets of lily of the valley because my grandmother loved them. It was lily of the valley as far as you could see. I don't even know what happened to that field, when it's... things came and people started to construct the condos and whatnot. One of the fun things was you would come out of the old ballpark on Edith Cavell, and there were 102 steps to climb up to the top of Picnic Hill, wooden steps. We'd run up and down them just for fun to see who could get up the fastest and down the fastest. And so we spent our time outdoors doing all the things that kids don't do nowadays. They don't. They miss out on so much by not knowing their community.
What about in the winter? What are the things you did in the winter, Sharon?
We skated. There are homes right now behind Foodland. There was not a Foodland. There was the Anglican Church, and where Foodland and those homes are was the Anglican Church pond, the church pond. You caught frogs in the spring. You skated in the winter. We skated on the creek. Somebody would, and it was cold enough then, dads would go out and shovel a spot out, often behind where Stan's Marina is now, because they had lights. The rest of the place, we didn't have lights. We would skate on the church pond. We would skate on the creek. And then one year, the Lions built a huge skating rink down on Main Street. What's there now? Drift. And it's a gray building that sits back in, I can't remember, it's a ladies' clothing store. Anyways, huge rink. And we were there one night skating, and I remember this so well, the Bell twins, who were very competitive and I think still are, got into the worst fight. We're all just standing back. 'Cause we
Fight with each other?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And by the time they were finished, there was blood everywhere. And one of us looked at the other and said, okay, who's taking them home to their dad? He was the doctor. And you just showed up. Everybody showed up. We would skate there.
That was right on the main street, you said?
Right on the main street, across from, right beside where the Pineapple dining room was.
Clifton.
No, Telegraph House.
Telegraph
House.
okay.
Between Telegraph House and Frankly Scarlet, big empty lot. And we would all go and skate. One of the things then at that point, Reverend Smitheram was the minister at our church, and his 3 children lived here. And Reverend Smitheram had 1 daughter. And we remember we went down one night to skate, and there was his daughter skating with another young man from the village. Well, we just thought that was, this is the minister's daughter. She's out skating with, I think his last name was Wyatt. And they were very active in our church. And everybody just showed up after supper, and you would skate. They would take one end for hockey, the other end for skating. That's what we did. Yeah. We would go to St. Thomas Golf and Country Club in Toboggan. That was the best hill around. Again, you had to find a parent or somebody that could take you because we couldn't get there on our own. Yeah. So that's what we did. And I did go to school in the old red brick building, and I loved it. There was, you went through, you started on the main floor for grade 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then you got to go down the basement for grade 5 and 6. Then you got to go upstairs for grade 7. And then you were back on the main floor with Mr. McKeever for grade 8. And you just knew that, it wasn't you just walked down the hall. It was, okay, I'm graduating. I get to go to the basement. I don't know why we thought that was a big thing, but we went to the basement. So I can remember most of my teachers through Miss Graham was my grade 1 teacher. Mrs. Lawrence was my grade 2 teacher. Mrs. Ashmore was my grade 3 teacher. Mrs. Fleming was my grade 4 teacher. Mrs. Charlton was she was my grade 7 teacher, Mr. McKeever. Oh, Mrs. Storms. Mrs. Storms, Mr. Charlton, and Mr. McKeever. And I played with all their kids. I grew up with their kids.
So Sharon, you knew all the kids in Port Stanley, but in the summer there'd be other kids because people come to their cottages. Did you get to know some of them as well?
Absolutely.
Tell us about where you would meet them or how you'd connect with them.
The second home I lived in was up on top of the schoolhouse hill. Well, most of the folks that came for the summer were down in Orchard Beach. Archie and Sarah Campbell, the Anderson kids that lived over on McClarty Ave, at the end of Edith Cavell, and there's still some little cottages there. The kids came from the U.S. and we would get to interact with them. I remember Janet and Robin Shute. And we got to go into their cottages, and they had the end of Edith Cavell, and the ones from London and St. Thomas were more down Orchard Beach. The McManus kids, the Smith kids. Who else was down there?
And so how would you get to know them?
Well, for one thing, most of the kids in Port had summer jobs at the summer things. I worked all of my 4 summers in high school at Mackey's, the original Mackey's for Marjorie and Ken Turnbull. They had pan boys where the boys would cook the hamburgers and hot dogs. I was a table girl. Our job was to clean the tables and to make up the relishes. Mr. and Mrs. Turnbull lived on William Street, just as you're going to go around the corner to go by the Legion. The Hutchinsons is the big red house. The one just behind it, it's a tall brown brick. That's where Mr. and Mrs. Turnbull lived. And the table girls had to go every day, walk up to Turnbull's and have an hour off and sit on their front porch. And Mr. Turnbull had this beautiful, great big Cadillac. And the oldest pan boy, because we always worked till 11 o'clock at night, his job was to get the table girls into the car and drive them home. We never were allowed to walk home. We got ourselves to the job, but at nighttime, the Turnbulls would not let us walk home.
And so they would drive you in that big Cadillac.
Yes,
And drop you off.
and you had to earn that right. The boys did for Mr. Turnbull. Mr. Turnbull was very brusque, very abrupt, but very caring. And they had two ladies, Mrs. Young and her mother. They worked in the kitchen. They made the special sauces and the relishes, but also we all would have dinner there. Their job was to make dinner for all of the kids in the chip booth, which were only boys, all of the boys on the counter in the main booth, and the table girls. And Mrs. Young and her mother would make us dinner, meatloaf, pork chops, whatever. We were treated like a family.
So that you weren't eating hot dogs for supper when you worked at Mackey's.
But at 9:30 at night, you got a treat. You could have chips and a hot dog or 2 hot dogs. And again, the boys set that up, and then you were told you could go. It was your turn. We would hold crib tournaments when it wasn't busy, or we were on a break. We'd take turn, and all the kids would do crib tournaments. And again, where the Buccaneer is now, and where you get to Casware, in that area there, this side of the roller rink, was a cul-de-sac of small cottages, and they were owned by Mrs. Lombardo. And the Lombardos were from London and very well related to Guy Lombardo, but all little cottages. And Mr. Turnbull rented all those cottages for the summer. And all of the boys that came from out of town to work, you had to live in the village. And he arranged for them all to live in the cottages. The girls all lived in the village. There wasn't a girl from out of town that came and worked, but the boys did. A lot of the boys from university and whatnot came. Mr. Turnbull had cottages for them all. They lived together right there by the booth, and back and forth they went. And they treated us all like family. They really did. It was a great experience. And then in the winter, I worked at the Stork Club, first for Lloyd Gurr and his group, and then for John and Blanche Nemeth. And again, I worked as a waitress. And the interesting thing at the Stork Club was the kitchen was downstairs, and they had these big dumb waiters that would take all of the food upstairs, and we would climb the stairs, and we served lots of companies' Christmas parties, and we would work the dances and run the food. And I worked for John and Blanche Nemeth for 4 years there. And when I was little, my mom was Lloyd Gurr's ticket taker at the Stork Club. When Tommy Dorsey was there, when Glenn Miller was there, when Guy Lombardo was there, and we were living on William Street, right by the train tracks. My grandmother on Saturday nights would bath us all, put us in our pajamas, and we would walk down to the front of the Stork Club, and there were benches, and we all got to sit there and watch the ladies go in their beautiful dresses, because everybody dressed up. You didn't go anywhere in jeans or whatever. So our Saturday nights in the summer, we're sitting there, and then in the winter, my dad would go and help with my mom when they did the big New Year's Eve parties at Stork Club. And my mom worked in the grocery store and worked at the Stork Club. They stayed in the village and worked in the village. Yeah.
Everybody was so hardworking. Did you have any time to have fun
Oh,
in the
yes, we
water?
had a great time. Oh, my goodness. Playing was, and again, they just expected, and whatever house you were at, when it was lunchtime or whatever, the mom, Helen Bell was great. We were up at the dock and Helen Bell's all the time. She would just yell, okay, come and get your sandwiches. Wherever you were, the parents fed you. But one time, I remember the Bell kids and my brothers and sisters, we found a nest of baby skunks. So being kids, we thought, well, let's raise them. We didn't think about them smelling. We didn't. So we brought the baby skunks in, put them in my brother's closet upstairs in our house at the top of the schoolhouse hill. Didn't tell anybody. We got them in there. And it wasn't until my grandmother thought, what is that smell? And I guess we were outside at that point, because in her investigation, she found this wonderful nest of baby skunks we had in Greg's bedroom closet. And she came out the back door, if you people do not get in here and get these skunks, she said. So then we took them up to Helen Bell's. We made a cage, a wire cage, and put them in the cage. We were bound and bent. We were going to raise those skunks. And we did. And in the Bell house, the Bells lived up at the end of Hill Street, a big white house. And in their third floor, this attic space they had, if you climbed up and went in the rafters, there was like a floor, and they had covered it in mattresses and pillows, and we would climb up in the rafters and jump down into the place where all the mattresses and pillows were. How we didn't break a bone or something, I have no idea. And Helen Bell was in the house, and she knew we were there, and she just let us have our fun. There was, nobody said, oh my gosh, sit down, you're going to hurt yourself. You're going to, no. You want to try it? You go ahead. It's your
You'll learn.
You'll
One way or the other.
Yeah, you'll learn the hard way. I remember one time at school, the Bell boys were very athletic and still are. And we rode on the ball diamond. And when you're younger and you're fooling around, there's like a knob on the end of a bat. So you throw the bat like this, but the knob stops it from going farther. Well, Doug Bell was doing that, fooling around, and he did it to my sister Carol, and there was no knob on the end of the bat. Hit her right in the eye. We thought she lost her eye. Mr. McKeever called my mom. My mom came. We took her over. In those days, you just walked into Dr. Bell's office. You didn't make an appointment. You walked in. You sat in a chair. You saw who was there. The last person that went in before you came, you knew you were the next person in the door. But my mom went in, and Dr. Bell came out, and he took one look at Carol and my mother and said, which of the twins did this? He just knew. I remember one time, and the Bells were living on Smith Street, and we were playing, and the boys decided it was a good idea to start a fire in the closet where their mother's fur coat was. And they did. I mean...
How bad did that get?
Not bad. They got it put out before it got too much damage. So we just did it. Somebody said, let's do it. We did it. So it was fun. It was youthful. You were running. And I remember my own children, when Laura got old enough, I think she was maybe 6, maybe 7, and we lived at the top of the hill, and she wanted to go to the library by herself. She wanted to walk down and get her books by herself. And I thought, oh my goodness, but we're going to give it. So off she went, across the road, where they now have a stop sign at the top of that hill, which is ridiculous. And on the path she went. Well, she got down to the bank area, and Betty Marr called me and said, do you know that Laura's in the village? And then Dora Bolt called me and said, do you know that Laura's in the village? And then Sue Very called me and said, do you know that Laura's at the library? So I thought, we're good. She can walk where she wants. Nobody's going to hurt her because everyone watched where she went, walked home, and walked back all by herself.
That was a beautiful time for everybody would be looking after everyone.
And they knew your children. They knew by sight, and they knew whether they should be out or whether they shouldn't. So even growing up in the village, my girls, it was perfect. They walked across the road to do what they wanted. Everybody in the village knew them. Me growing up, very active in my church, we had a wonderful, large youth group. Dean Chevalier, who was a reporter for London Free Press, I don't remember, he ran our youth group. He ran the senior part of our Sunday school. And we had a big youth group. We did hay rides. We did games nights. We did all kinds of things. There was always something going on in the church basement. And we had a good time doing it, yeah. And then as we got older, my husband was a rover in the village, and we, as the rover crew and their girlfriends, we ran dances upstairs in the town hall for the kids in the village. Charged them 10 cents to get in. We had pop and chips, and every Saturday night they knew the rovers were running a dance. Everybody showed up because there was no place else to go in the village, and we as youth ran the dances for the other kids. It was a great time. We had some issues, but nothing that got out of hand. Everybody enjoyed. And I remember when we finally stopped doing them, the kids that were disappointed. But, we got older. They went off to university. They got jobs. There were things to do. But years we ran the rover dances in the town hall. And for years, my a long time ago, I started a synchronized skating club in the village. I was the person that started the Icebreakers in 1988, I guess, 87, 88, because I left in 98. And every Halloween, we would run a haunted house from the upstairs of the town hall, full haunted house. You had to work your way through it. There were people with heads under tables. And we would have lineups out the door. We ran it the weekend prior to Halloween and the weekend of Halloween. There were some times that people were so scared, we'd yell, "Okay, everybody stop." We'd turn the lights on. We have to walk this person out. Our children were part of it. They would hide under the bed and grab your feet. It was a full out. We made 8 rooms in that upper level of that town, where the theater is now in the town hall, and ran a haunted house every Halloween. So, and my synchronized skating group eventually went to Canadians, and we won a medal. And I retired and took up skiing. So again, always things that are in the village. I've always been, what can we do for the village? How do we make our community fun and better? So I've enjoyed 77 years here. It really is hard to believe.
And you obviously have a lot more energy left in you. Non-stop.
I am a Lioness member. We just ran a community breakfast and we had 250 people. Free of charge, just come up and have breakfast. Yeah. So, the village is special. The village is growing. It isn't that wrap around you feeling anymore that there used to be. But when I read online and see people enjoy the village, they come here and go, this is a wonderful spot. This is, we have chosen where we want to be. And to still have that kind of effect on people. I mean, I grew up here. As a child, I couldn't go to Big Beach. You were not allowed to go to Big Beach.
Why was that?
Well, my parents always felt it was dangerous, and they always, and I don't know if this was something that parents realized, the danger for them was that area between the pier and Mackey's that is still the dangerous area. They were always so concerned that
the undertow.
Yeah, and whatever. So we lived at the top of the hill, so we would go prospect down the steps and into Little Beach. At that point in Little Beach, there were wooden docks that ran along the shoreline. My grandmother would pack us a lunch. We would leave at 8 o'clock in the morning and we would come back just in time for supper. We'd spend the whole day at Little Beach. And you could walk out forever, and it wasn't that deep. And most of the village kids knew, or like Verna Lynn that lived on Main Street, she showed up. The Howie kids showed up. The Bell kids showed up. We all showed up at Little Beach. We all brought a lunch. We all spent the day. That's where you...
But without your parents.
Yes, never a parent. Never, no parent.
So that was the locals' beach, was it?
It was, yeah. And now it's the place, even if you read online, that people say, well, go there, it's better, it's shallow, it's safer for kids. But it was the locals' beach. People driving into the village didn't even know Little Beach existed. When you came by train, the only beach was the Big Beach. So the Little Beach was the locals' beach, and it had the coal piles. When we lived on Maud Street, I remember with my grandpa, we would at night, after it got dark, take our bucket and we'd go over to the coal piles and fill it with coal to heat the little cottage on Main Street, on Maud Street. That's what you did. And my grandpa would say, okay, sure, come on, Sharon, we got the bucket. Off we'd go over to the coal piles. And in the coal piles were little silver discs. They looked like dimes. And I would gather up the discs while Grandpa filled the kettle, filled the coal scuttle. We did that every night all winter because that's how you heated your house.
What were the discs about?
They were silver and they were in the middle of the coal, and I don't know. But I remember having a whole jar of them. He would get the coal and they were, I don't know if they were put in there to keep the coal from clumping together, but it was full of little silver discs, nothing on them, just the size of a dime. We'll have to do some research on that. There was. And that's what I would do. I'd pick the silver discs. I mean, all we had was a flashlight because you really weren't supposed to take the coal. But we did anyway. So that was part of living on Maud Street. We would walk to, and there were coal piles over by the little beach, and there was a big tank, Sterling Fuels tank, as you entered Little Beach. And people would think, is that the place you want to swim? Well, the tank was self-contained, and we at the Little Beach knew. And as teenagers, down kind of near where Hoffus Park is, just at the end of the pier there used to be an old tree that went right out into the harbor. And we would go down there and dive off the tree and swim in the harbor. And you learned to swim in port. It was expected. You knew how to take care of yourself in the water and learn to swim. So we dove off the tree, but I would say I haven't swam at Big Beach 5 times in my life. Yeah. It's still, even with my own children, you want to go, you go to Little Beach.
And so even when you worked at Mackey's in the store club, that wasn't where you went to the beach?
No, not at all. Not at all. Everybody else went. And I remember when I worked at Mackey's, there used to be the arcade, the bathhouse there that had the arcade in it. And we'd go down and play the arcade games. And I remember when it burnt down, and one of the boys I grew up with, John McKeever, his dad, Norm McKeever, was a fisherman. And one of the walls from that fell on him and injured him badly. And he lived with that the rest of his life. He was a volunteer, young volunteer firefighter with Port Stanley. And I remember when the bathhouse burned. I remember when Hillcrest Inn burnt, and it was owned by a family called McDonald's, because at that time my sister Carol was dating the son. She dated Charlie McDonald. We got a call, the Hillcrest Inn is burning. The Hillcrest Inn was the place to go. My dad, like most men in port, was a Kiwanis member. Everybody was a Kiwanis member, and they used to hold father-daughter banquets. I got to go to the Hillcrest Inn for dinner. I put on a fancy dress. It was the best day of the whole year. I went with my dad, and I went to the Hillcrest Inn for dinner. So, and then when the Clifton burnt down, all of these places that were part of my youth, part of my growing, and what has replaced them? Yeah, there's just so much. The other day I was sitting thinking, okay, who are the people I remember from the village? And the ladies from the church I was going over, there was Flo Williams, there was Mildred Marr, there was Eva Goodhue, there was Ada Makey, there was Fondi Rausch. And I'm going, all these people. As a teenager, one of the fun things for me was when the ladies of the church asked me to help serve at a wedding. In those days, you had your wedding at the church, and you had your reception at the church. So the basement would be decorated up, and we would serve these dinners on these beautiful plates, and the bride would come downstairs and all of the people. And I always thought it was so good when they asked me if I would be part and help serve these weddings. And these ladies were in the church kitchen. They had it down to a science. They were just, and they cooked meals like nobody's business. They were, yeah. And that was part of what I did. Call up Sharon. She'll come and help serve the dinners. I did. I thought it was great fun. They all kind of took care of me and looked after me. I remember they threw me a sweet 16 birthday party when I turned 16.
Wow.
And our church when it was before, Dora and Lionel Bold headed up a Sunday school that was massive, just massive. Lionel was our superintendent. Dora was my very first Sunday school teacher. And you went down into the basement and up some steps and into a room that was hers as the youngest youngest church class. She had that special room. But Margaret Marr was one of my school teachers. Dora Bolt was one of my Sunday school teachers. Lionel was one of my Sunday school teachers. Dean Chevalier was one of my Sunday school teachers. And at the end of the Sunday school, as you heard the last hymn upstairs, everybody came out into the middle, and we did a little prayer and sang a song. And there were kids everywhere. Kids everywhere. That's what you did. Reverend Clark from Port St. United Church baptized me. Reverend Boa confirmed me. Reverend Gill married me. And then Reverend Jim Azawa married Allison. Reverend Carl Sievert married Laura, and Carl Sievert's daughter Birgit and my daughter Laura were great friends and during that time we had Reverend Asumang Barakarang. He was so all of these people that, helped form who
And what
I am.
about choir, Sharon? Because
Oh.
you're a singer these days. You sing in the Port Stanley
And
Community Choir.
Bob Birchmore and I had a junior choir. We had the Birchmore twins. We had all three of Colleen Rogers' boys, Jeremy, Eric, and David. We had, the kids' names at the end of Curry Boulevard. Patrick. And I'm trying to think. My girls were in it. The Weens children were in it. We had a huge choir, and we sang at Chris Sievert's wedding. And Bob Birchmore and I, every week and every year, we put on a cantata for the church and loved it. Yeah, it was just one of those fun things. And again, kids came, whether they belonged to the United Church or not. It was just a fun junior choir, and you could come and be part of it. And they came. We filled the choir loft. Yeah. And yes, and I am the last original member of the Port Stanley Community Choir. Ross Woodhouse and I were the last two, and Ross passed last year. So this year for community choir, what am I? 38 years, something like that. Yes.
And hopefully you're doing another Christmas concert.
Well, Rosemary is, but I'm wondering if I'm still going to. It's getting to that point. But again, it's fun. Yes, music's a very important part. I love that. And then, as I say, I was a skater, and then I was a skier, and and my family is close to me, and we did things together. When Larry and I were doing synchronized skating, so were our children. And at one point, they got old enough that we all skated for the adult team, and then we all started to ski together. And still, when we do something, they're here. Their heart is in Port Stanley, but they won't ever move back. There's just, you move on with what you're doing. And but when we talk about the fact that we may not stay, that's when they say, well, now, wait a minute.
Well, they always want to.
Where do we come back to?
Yeah, exactly.
Come back.
They want to play a bed here when they come to visit.
Yeah, where do we come back to? And again, as I say, I worked for the municipality. Again, giving back to my community. It's just, I loved, yeah.
You'd worked for a lot of different mayors and councils. And
Yes.
Yeah.
The one I worked for longest was Ray Lavro.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Ray Lavro was Reeve. Penny Talmy was Reeve. Sylvia Hoffus was Reeve. Joan Wakeling was counselor for a long, long time. Linda Buchanan was counselor. Marvin Berry is a fisherman. His daughter Marna does Calypso. Marvin was very dry in here. And at one point, let's say, tourism makes Port Stanley go around. That's what we are. But I remember at one point when the council was discussing improving some things for tourists, I remember Marvin Berry saying, well, the tourists arrive with a white shirt and a $5 bill, and they never change either of them. He was not into doing the stuff for tourists. Art Darrow was a counselor when I was there. Jack Pierce was a counselor when I was there. Yeah, lots of things. I worked for David LaCroix up until he had his stroke. And then I left and went to Yarmouth. And Don Leach came in and was and then we all ended up in Central Elgin together when Mike Harris thought amalgamation was a great thing. Not sure it was, but, he had to cut down on the excess of government. I'd say it was a success, but it didn't cut anything. Personal opinion from working in it in 31 years. Yeah. So yes, I served under lots of councillors and Reeves and deputy Reeves and mayors and deputy mayors. Yeah.
Yours is a story of one job leading to another, very much.
Yes.
You started with the bank. Was that just by fluke, or were you interested in finance?
No, I wasn't. I graduated. My brother was my cousin. He was my aunt's son, but she had him and she was young, so my mother took him over. So he got to go to Central. I was sent to Arthur Voden because in Central, you did things so you were going on in continuing education. Arthur Voden, they were training you to go into a job, whether it be a nurse, a secretary, whatever. So Gregory was a year older than me, so he went to Central, and he messed up his grade 9 year terribly. So my dad said to me, well, if Greg can't do Central, Sharon, you can't do Central, so we're going to send you to Arthur Voden. So my dad arranged, and I went to Arthur Voden. We found out eventually Greg screwed up because he just didn't do anything. Not he wasn't capable, he was just having fun. He wasn't going to do the work, he was just going to have the fun. So when I was coming out of Arthur Voden, in those days, you finished your high school. My dad was a Kiwanis member. Ross Hardcastle, bank manager, was a Kiwanis member. In a discussion, Ross Hardcastle had said one of his staff, Sherry Bell Taylor, was pregnant and she would be leaving the bank. And my dad said, well, I just happen to have someone that needs a job. So my dad walked me down the hill. I didn't need a car or anything. I lived at the top of the hill. I had a meeting with Mr. Hardcastle, and the next week I started at CIBC, whether I wanted to or not. Mm-hmm. And I worked at CIBC. Eventually, after having both of my children, I went back to school and got my degree in municipal administration. I remember having a bag phone in my car. You know how you plugged it in? Because I drove myself from here over to London. It was partially Fanshawe, partially Western. And I was driving at night, so Larry bought me a bag phone so I could, in case anything happened. So I earned my degree in municipal administration and accounting. And that's how I got into, Penny Talmy got me the job first. And then I thought, yes, I like this. It's people, it's government. I like government. I like politics. And so then that's when I started. So I graduated. I started when my youngest child was 7, and I graduated when she was 17. So I worked full time, raised 2 girls, worked for my village, looked after my parents, and graduated when she was 17. I loved municipal government. I got up every day wanting to go to work. It was great. I don't know if it is now, but it was then. And everybody, God gave me a gift. The gift was, I'm getting older, if I saw you and looked at you and heard your name, I remembered it. I was good with names. So a tax collector, a taxpayer, I'm the collector, would come in mad as the devil about something with their taxes and how were we treating them so unfairly, and they weren't going to pay them, and I'd walk out and call them by name and come and sit and talk to me. Let's see what we can do about this. And as they left me a check and went with a smile. I loved that. I loved that you could say, this is what's going on. We may not like it, but this is what it is. And this is what your taxes do for you. And how is your family and what's going on. And I loved being that part of what made the community go around. Yeah.
Sounds like you connected people and remembered
Yes.
the details. So you could...
Whoever came to the
reconnect.
counter, I could call them by name.
Yeah.
That diffuses things right away. When you can walk up and say, well, Mrs. Jones, or well, Rachel, how are you? How can I help you? Right away when you know who they are and it stops. They stop being defensive. They go, okay, let's work this out. Yeah. Now, in my job, it wasn't always easy. Being a tax collector isn't. And more than once, people threatened to shoot me. And the one part that was really scary was a gentleman who owned a variety store in New Sarum, did not like that I was a woman in the position I was, that said what had to happen. And he was the only one that really, I thought he might do it. And I remember later telling my CEO, I said, oh yeah, this guy threatened to shoot me. And he said, Sharon, you have to tell us. We have to tell the police. I said, well, most times I just think they're annoyed. But I said, that time it really was. I thought, yeah, you don't like that you have to follow the rules I didn't set. The provincial government set them, but that was the only time. But again, most of the time it was good. People were good. They were glad what you were doing for them. And I mean, nobody elected me. And lots of times the elected officials didn't take my advice, but that was their choice, not mine. But it was a job, again, that I loved and helped people. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's been an interesting life. Now that I've talked to you about it, it really has.
It must seem like it went by pretty fast with all that activity.
It does. And I was in the hospital yesterday and said to someone, I'm 76. We'll be 77 in 2 weeks. And the girl said to me, well, you certainly have a lot of energy for 76. I said, I don't think about it. Age is a matter of mind. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter. And that's how I look at it. Yeah.
What's your next big adventure?
I wanted to run for council. And I retired in 2012, and in 2014 I was going to run for council, but my husband had open heart surgery. He had an aortic valve replacement, double bypass. So I thought, okay, the universe is saying, don't run for council, So then I thought, 2018, I'm going to run for council. My husband got diagnosed with a rare blood cancer. I thought, okay, God is saying to me, this is not the path you're taking. For 6 years, I was chairman of the Central Community Health Center in St. Thomas. They deal with all the street people and the addicts and whatnot. I was the chair of their board, worked with the chief of police, Chris Hedridge from St. Thomas. I loved that. That was a great thing. But you come to a point and an end. So I don't know, is there another board out there I'd like to step up and help? I don't know.
I'm sure you'll find it.
I like people, David. I like people. I really do. That's my love. People are so interesting and so, as a whole, kind and caring and make the world go round. So when I retired in 2012, my husband bought me a dandelion picker. One of those things. And he said to me, when I come home and all the dandelions are gone from our lawn and all the lawns on the street, I will know you have settled into retirement. Well, that never happened. So I was off just for a while, and then I started my own consulting company, and I worked for every municipality in Elgin County, helping them find either a CEO or a treasurer. Through unexpected pregnancy issues, their treasurer would have to walk out the door. Somebody still has to write the checks and keep, so I'd get a phone call. I remember I was in Florida. Larry and I were in for the month of March, and David Aristone, who was the treasurer for St. Thomas, but at this time he was the treasurer for Bayham Township, called me and said, funny, hi Sharon, are you sitting on a beach? Are you sitting on the beach? Because it was March. And I said, well, David, as a matter of fact, I am. He said, what do you mean? I said, I'm in Florida. Oh, well, what are chances of April 1st you coming to Bayham and being the CEO and the treasurer? I need you to help them find a CEO. I need you to help them find a treasurer, because I'm going back to work for the city of St. Thomas. So I went to Bayham. I went to Dutton Dunwich. I went to West Elgin. I went to Malahide.
You finished your time on the beach, though. You didn't rush back, did you? Sounds like you just got on the plane and came back.
And then with Larry's diagnosis in 2018, I had to slow down. Yeah. And he's 7 years in. He's still going strong. It's more and more. But at that point, I knew that had to be my focus. But I still, last year for the Lioness Wine and Cheese, I was their MC and ran the program. And yeah.
She does a very good job chairing a meeting or all that stuff. Yeah.
Yes, I like Coles Notes meetings. I don't like long meetings. Yeah. So no, I think this is nice that you've asked me. It's been a wonderful walk down memory lane for me. And yeah, I can see my mom and dad standing out in front of the house on Maud Street and on William Street. And, when we moved up the hill, that was another step in the right direction. And yeah.
Well, we really appreciate you sharing all those memories with us today.
Well, I am glad to. They're interesting questions. It was such fun. Thank you
Thanks so much, Sharon. Bye-bye.